You're standing in the checkout line at Walmart with a $38 pair of shoes in your hand. They're cute. They were a deal. The pair you actually wanted at the other store was $85, and you couldn't justify it. You tell yourself you're being smart. You tell yourself you saved $47. You take them home, wear them 4 times in a month, and the soles start separating from the upper. By month 3, the heel has collapsed. By month 4, they're in the trash. You buy another pair. Same logic, same outcome. 6 months later, you've cycled through 3 of those $38 pairs. You've spent $114 on shoes. The $85 pair you didn't buy would have lasted 3 years and still look good doing it. $29 more up front. Hundreds of dollars saved over time. But the cheap option felt right in the moment because the number on the price tag was smaller. That was the whole calculation. That's the entire trap. This is one of the most expensive financial habits in America, and almost nobody recognizes it as a problem because it disguises itself as responsibility. Buying cheap feels frugal. Buying cheap feels disciplined. Buying cheap feels like the smart, conservative move. The math says the opposite. Across most categories of spending, the cheapest version of an item is almost always the most expensive version when you account for how often you have to replace it, what it costs to maintain, what it costs to fix, and what it costs you in opportunity cost when the savings never get redirected toward anything else. The poverty premium is real. It's measurable. It hits hardest exactly when people can least afford it. And the most painful part is that almost everyone caught in it sincerely believes they're being financially responsible while it happens. Today, I'm going to walk you through what's actually happening when you choose the cheap version of something, where the trap operates, why it's so effective, which categories punish you the hardest, and what to actually do about it without falling into the opposite trap of overspending on premium for the sake of premium. Quick disclaimer before we start. None of this is financial advice. Your situation is yours. This is education about a pattern. Use it as a map, not a prescription. Let's get into it. The principle underneath everything we're going to discuss is something economists call cost per use. Most people make purchasing decisions based on the price tag. Cost per use is the only honest measure of what something actually costs you. To calculate it, you take the total amount you spend on the item over its lifespan, including the purchase price, repairs, maintenance, and replacements. Then divide that by the number of times you actually use it. That number is what you really paid. A $200 jacket worn twice costs $100 per wear. A $400 jacket worn 200 times costs $2 per wear. The $400 jacket isn't expensive. It's dramatically cheaper. The $200 jacket isn't a deal. It's one of the most expensive purchases you've ever made on a per-use basis. The math doesn't care about the sticker. The math cares about the lifespan and the frequency. Once you start running this calculation on the things you've been buying, the picture becomes uncomfortable very quickly. The cheap stuff cycles through your life. The good stuff outlasts everything around it. The cheap stuff feels like savings. The good stuff is savings. This is the lens we'll use throughout. Now let me walk you through the specific categories where buying cheap is quietly bankrupting people right now. Start with clothing. The fast fashion model that dominates American retail is built specifically around the cost per use trap. Stores like Shein, H&M, Zara, and Forever 21 survive because the per item price is low enough that customers don't run the math. The average Shein price point hovers around $8 to $14 per item. The garment is designed to last roughly 7 to 10 wears before something fails. The fabric pills, the seams come apart, the dye fades, the fit shifts. By wear number 10, the item is no longer wearable in any setting where appearance matters. According to research published by Earth.org and updated through early 2026, the average American throws away roughly 82 pounds of clothing every single year. 11 million tons of textile waste come out of the United States alone every year, and most of it is fast fashion that failed within months of purchase. The average American woman now owns roughly 103 pieces of clothing, up from 9 outfits in 1929. The closet got bigger, the clothes got worse. The total annual spending stayed roughly constant in real terms, but the per-item lifespan collapsed. Let me put concrete numbers on this. Imagine someone buying 12 fast fashion shirts a year at $12 each. That's $144 a year on shirts that will mostly be unwearable within 12 to 18 months. Across 10 years, that's $1,440 on shirts that produced almost no permanent value. The same person could have bought 4 $35 shirts of mid-tier quality each year for $140 annually, kept them for 3 years each, and ended up with the same wardrobe rotation, vastly fewer items in the trash, and roughly the same total spending with significantly less stress. The cheaper option produced more landfill waste, more closet clutter, and zero financial gain. Or consider Marcus, a 32-year-old account manager in Charlotte. He spent the last 3 years buying $25 jeans from a fast fashion site because the $85 pair at the workwear store felt indulgent. He averaged about 8 pairs of those cheap jeans per year. Frayed knees, stretched waistbands, stitches blowing out at the inseam. $25 times 8 pairs is $200 annually. 3 years in, he'd spent $600 on jeans, owned 0 functional pairs, and had a closet full of bag of clothes for Goodwill candidates. The $85 pair he kept passing on would have cost $85 total, lasted 4 years easy, and saved him $515 across the same window. He thought he was being careful with money. He was being precisely the opposite. The trap with cheap clothing isn't just per-item failure. It's that the low price point invites over-purchasing. Nobody buys 12 of an $85 shirt. Plenty of people buy 12 $12 shirts because each individual decision feels small. The cheapness manufactures volume. The volume manufactures waste. The waste is the actual product the industry is selling you. You're not paying for clothes. You're paying for a relationship with disposability that quietly drains your account month after month. Move to shoes. Same dynamic, more obvious damage. A pair of $35 shoes from a discount retailer typically lasts somewhere between 4 and 8 months under regular use before the structural integrity collapses. The materials are bonded with adhesive instead of stitched. The soles are made of compounds designed to look like rubber, but degrade under heat and friction. The insoles compress within weeks and never bounce back. Compare that to a pair of $160 work boots or leather shoes built with proper construction. Those last 4 to 6 years with minimal maintenance, often longer with resoling. Across a decade, the cheap path costs you somewhere between $500 and $1,000 in replacement shoes. The premium path costs you $250 to $320 total and ends with you still owning a functional pair. The same logic destroys people in furniture. The $500 particle board couch from a flat pack retailer, the kind held together with cam locks and dowels, has an average expected lifespan of 3 to 5 years before sagging, splitting, or falling apart at the joints. The $1,500 hardwood frame couch with proper joinery and replaceable cushions lasts 15 to 20 years, sometimes longer. Run the math. $500 every 4 years for 20 years is $2,500 in couch spending. $1,500 every 20 years is $1,500 in couch spending. The premium option saves you $1,000 while delivering a better product across the entire window. People who buy cheap furniture tell themselves they're being practical. They're paying a $1,000 premium to feel practical for a few months at the start of each 4-year cycle. The kitchen tells the same story with even more brutal numbers. According to research compiled by Cosmo Appliances and corroborated by appliance reliability reports through early 2026, a budget refrigerator priced around $600 typically lasts 6 to 8 years. A premium refrigerator priced around $1,500 typically lasts 13 to 17 years. Run the cost per year. The $600 fridge over 7 years averages $86 per year of use. The $1,500 fridge over 15 years averages $100 per year of use. They're roughly comparable on cost per year, but the cheap version produces more emergencies, more food spoilage, more replacement disruption, and more stress. The premium version sits there working for 15 years while you live your life. This is before you account for repair costs. Per 2026 data, average appliance repair costs run between $100 and $1,300 depending on the appliance and the failure type. Refrigerator repairs average highest because compressors, control boards, and ice maker systems are expensive parts. The 50% rule that appliance technicians use is straightforward. If a repair costs more than 50% of replacement cost, replace. Below 50%, repair. Cheap appliances trigger the replace decision earlier and more often because the repair cost is high relative to the original purchase price. Premium appliances stay in repair territory longer because the replacement number is high enough that fixing makes sense for many more years. Let me pause here for a moment because the deeper pattern is becoming visible. Cheap stuff isn't bad because it's cheap. Cheap stuff is bad because it's engineered for a short lifespan that the manufacturer absorbs into the price. The price tag tells you what the item costs to acquire. The price tag does not tell you what the item costs to own. Ownership cost is where the entire economy of cheap goods extracts its profit. You pay less up front, you pay more across time, and you don't notice the difference because the additional payments are spread across years, and they look like normal life expenses instead of the original mistake compounding. Move to cars. This is the category where the cheap trap creates the most permanent damage because the numbers are bigger and the lifespan is longer. The trap with cars is twofold. There's the trap of buying a cheap, unreliable car, and there's the trap of buying a cheap-feeling new car payment that's actually destroying your wealth. Both of these are happening to millions of Americans right now, and both fall under the same umbrella of buying cheap being expensive. Take the unreliable cheap car first. Someone buys a $3,500 used car from a buy here, pay here lot because that's what they can afford. The car needs new tires within 2 months at $600. A timing belt at $1,500 in month 7, a transmission at $2,800 in month 14, a new alternator, a new water pump, 4 trips to a mechanic at $250 each just for diagnostic time. By the end of 2 years, the $3,500 car has cost over $10,000 to keep on the road. The same person could have spent $12,000 on a 5-year-old Honda Civic with a clean service history, driven it for 10 years with basic maintenance, and ended up with massively lower total cost of ownership. Then there's the other side, the expensive, cheap-feeling new car. The $767 a month average new car payment in 2026, according to Experian's State of the Automotive Finance Market report from the fourth quarter of 2025, doesn't feel expensive in the moment because the dealer broke it into a monthly number. $767 times 68.9 months, the average loan term, comes out to $52,867 in payments. The car will be worth maybe $16,000 at the end of that loan. You've spent $52,000 to receive a $16,000 asset, the cheap monthly number disguised in expensive total purchase. Over 20% of new car buyers are now committing to monthly payments above $1,000. 18.91% of all new car loans now exceed $1,000 a month. Total U.S. auto loan debt sits at $1.667 trillion per Federal Reserve Bank of New York data. The country is being bled by car payments that look manageable in isolation and are catastrophic in aggregate. The cost per use math on a new car is brutal. $767 a month, invested at 8% average annual return for 25 years, compounds to roughly $728,000. That's the actual cost of choosing a new car payment over a paid-off used car. $750,000 in lost wealth to drive something with a newer infotainment screen. Move to housing. The cheap trap shows up here in two distinct ways, and both are catastrophic. First, the cheap rent trap. Someone moves into the cheaper apartment in the rougher area to save $300 a month. They didn't account for the higher commute time, the higher fuel cost, the higher car maintenance from the longer drives, the higher renter's insurance premiums, the higher likelihood of property crime adding theft replacement costs, and the time cost of being further from everywhere they need to go. By the end of the year, the $300 monthly savings has been eaten by hidden costs they didn't see coming. They saved cheap, they paid expensive. Second, the cheap house trap. People buy older homes in worse condition because the purchase price is lower, then discover that everything that was wrong with the house gets transferred to them as the new owner. The roof, the HVAC system, the plumbing, the electrical, the foundation. According to the Atlanta Fed's Housing Ownership Affordability Monitor, owning a median-priced home in 2026 consumes nearly 48% of the median household's income before any maintenance is factored in. People stretching for the cheap house often end up underwater on maintenance within the first 3 to 5 years of ownership. The cheap purchase price was an illusion. The real price included everything the previous owner deferred, which now lands on you. Move to electronics. The cheap television, the cheap laptop, the cheap phone, the cheap headphones. The trap operates the same way. A $250 laptop from a discount brand has a typical functional lifespan of 2 to 3 years before keyboards fail, screens crack, batteries die, or processing speed becomes intolerable. A $900 laptop with proper components lasts 6 to 8 years for most users with light maintenance. The cost per year favors the premium laptop by a wide margin, and the productivity cost of the cheap laptop, the time wasted waiting for slow software to load, the frustration of dropped video calls, the lost work from random crashes, never gets calculated because it doesn't show up as a line item on a bank statement. It just shows up as a quiet drag on your daily life. Move to food. This category is where the cheap trap hides most effectively because the dollar amounts are smaller and the consequences appear over years instead of months. The cheap groceries trap is real. Buying the $1.50 pasta and the 70-cent canned sauce and the bag of frozen processed something for $3 seems like savings. The food is engineered to be cheap by being made of high fructose corn syrup, refined seed oils, sodium-heavy preservatives, and fillers designed to mimic the taste of real food without the cost. The body processes this stuff, but it doesn't thrive on it. Decades of cheap eating produce health outcomes that become unbelievably expensive in the second half of life. Type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and obesity-related conditions are leading causes of medical bankruptcy in the United States. The American Diabetes Association estimates that the average annual medical cost for someone with diagnosed diabetes runs around $12,000 per year, above the cost for someone without diabetes. Across 30 years of post-diagnosis life, that's $360,000 in additional medical spending. Some of that is genetics. A meaningful portion of it traces back to decades of cheap food choices that felt like savings at the grocery store. Compare that to spending an extra $40 a week on real ingredients, whole vegetables, decent protein, fewer processed packages. $40 times 52 weeks is $2,800 a year. Across 30 years, that's $84,000 in additional grocery spending compared to the cheap path. The cheap path saves $84,000 at the register and costs $360,000 at the doctor's office. The real cost of cheap food is paid in a currency you don't see on a receipt. This is also where I want to be careful because eating well is genuinely expensive in some markets, and grocery prices have been brutal in 2026. The point isn't that you should never buy the cheap pasta. The point is that the cheap version of food, like the cheap version of everything else, has a cost that doesn't show up at checkout. Knowing that the cost exists changes how you think about the trade. Move to tools. This is one of the cleanest examples of the cheap trap in action because the failure mode is so visible. The $15 wrench from a discount store rounds the head off the first stubborn bolt you try to turn. Now you have a damaged bolt and a useless wrench. The $35 wrench from a reputable brand removes the bolt cleanly and lasts you 40 years. Same logic on drills, saws, screwdrivers, and every other tool category. The cheap version fails on the first hard job and costs you both the price of the tool and the price of the original problem you were trying to solve. The premium version costs more upfront and never enters your life as a problem again. Tradespeople figured this out generations ago. There's a reason mechanics and carpenters and electricians don't shop in the discount aisle. Their livelihoods depend on tools that work the first time. Regular consumers buy the cheap version because they only do home projects occasionally, and the failure rate seems acceptable when you're only using the tool every few months. The math reveals itself when you stack up a decade of cheap tool purchases. A drawer full of failed, cheap tools costs more than a small set of quality tools that lasted the entire decade. Move to insurance. The cheap insurance trap may be the most dangerous category on this entire list because the failure mode doesn't appear until something goes wrong, at which point it's too late. People buy the minimum auto insurance because the premium is cheaper. Then they get rear-ended by an uninsured driver and discover that their state minimum policy doesn't include uninsured motorist coverage. They eat the cost of the repairs. People buy the cheapest health insurance plan because the premium is lower, then face a major medical event and discover the deductible is $14,000 before any coverage kicks in. People skip renter's insurance because it's $20 a month, then face a kitchen fire that destroys everything they own and have no recourse. The cheap insurance saved them a few dollars a month for a few years and cost them tens of thousands of dollars when reality showed up. Average cost of a moderate car accident with hospitalization in the United States is somewhere between $20,000 and $75,000 when all medical and repair costs are accounted for. Average cost of a moderate house fire is between $50,000 and $200,000 in damage. Average cost of a single emergency room visit without insurance can run $3,000 to $15,000, depending on the procedure. The premium difference between cheap-out coverage and adequate coverage is typically $40 to $150 per month, which is between $500 and $1,800 a year. The cheap path saves a few thousand over 5 years. The expensive path costs hundreds of thousands the moment something happens. People keep choosing cheap because nothing has happened yet, and then something happens and the math reveals itself in a single afternoon. Let me circle back to the underlying principle. Across every category we've walked through, the same pattern emerges. The cheap version produces a savings on the receipt and a debt to the future. The future debt is invisible at the moment of purchase, which is why the cheap version feels like a win. The future debt becomes visible months or years later, by which point it's been distributed across enough small events that nobody connects them back to the original choice. The shoes that fall apart in 5 months don't feel like a continuation of the choice you made on a Tuesday afternoon at the discount store. The fridge that dies in year 7 doesn't feel like the price you agreed to pay when you saved $900 on the original purchase. The medical condition that emerges at 53 doesn't feel like the result of grocery decisions you made in your 30s. The cost gets fragmented across so many separate moments that the original cause disappears. This fragmentation is the entire reason the cheap trap works. If the full cost of buying cheap arrived as a single bill on the day of purchase, almost nobody would buy cheap. People would see $38 for shoes, plus the implied cost of replacement shoes for the next decade, plus the time cost of constantly shopping, plus the closet clutter, and they'd opt for the $85 pair without hesitation. But the bill doesn't arrive that way. It arrives in pieces, distributed across years, in forms that look like ordinary life expenses, and the connection back to the original choice is almost impossible to see in the moment. Now let me address the inverse trap, because this matters. The fact that cheap is often expensive does not mean expensive is always cheap. There's a separate trap on the other end of the spectrum where people convince themselves that buying premium is automatically the smart move regardless of context. The $2,000 designer jacket worn twice a year at black tie events is not a bargain just because the cost per use math could theoretically favor it. The $40,000 luxury sedan that you're using to commute 15 miles a day is not a wise long-term investment just because it'll last longer than a $12,000 Honda. There's a Goldilocks zone where cost per use actually wins. That zone almost always sits in the middle to upper middle of the price range for most consumer categories. Mid-tier, reliable brands, established quality manufacturers, trusted product categories with long histories of consistent performance. The bottom of the market is where the cheap trap lives. The top of the market is where status consumption lives. The middle is where actual financial intelligence happens. The framework for navigating this is simpler than it sounds. 3 questions asked before any non-trivial purchase. First, how often will I actually use this? Second, what is the expected lifespan of the cheap version versus the mid-tier version versus the premium version? Third, what does the math come out to on a per-use basis? If you can't answer those 3 questions, you're not making a financial decision. You're reacting to a price tag. The reaction feels like decision-making, but it isn't. It's pattern matching to whatever number looks smaller in the moment. Let me show you what this framework looks like in practice. Take a winter coat. Question 1. How often will you wear this? Answer: roughly 5 months a year, 4 to 5 days per week, which is about 100 wears per year. Question 2. Lifespan estimates. A $60 fast fashion coat lasts roughly 1 to 2 seasons before falling apart. A $200 mid-tier coat lasts roughly 6 to 8 years. A $600 premium coat lasts roughly 10 to 15 years. Question 3. Cost per use. $60 coat across 150 wears comes out to 40 cents per wear, but you'll buy 4 of them across 8 years, totaling $240. $200 coat across 700 wears comes out to 29 cents per wear. $600 coat across 1,300 wears comes out to 46 cents per wear. The mid-tier coat wins. Mid-tier almost always wins on items used frequently across multiple years. The premium coat is good, but not necessary. The cheap coat is the most expensive option once you account for replacement frequency. Run the same exercise on running shoes. Daily wear, year-round, roughly 500 miles before the cushioning degrades. Cheap option lasts maybe 200 miles before the support fails. Mid-tier option goes the full 500. Premium option goes maybe 600. Cost per mile favors the mid-tier almost every time. The cheap shoe sounds smart and is mathematically punishing. The premium shoe sounds smart and is mathematically about even with mid-tier on a price-to-performance basis. Run the exercise on a vacuum. Run it on a kitchen knife. Run it on a mattress. Run it on a winter tire. Run it on a backpack you'll use every day for work. The pattern repeats. The cost per use calculation almost always points to mid-tier as the winner for items you use frequently. The cheap version loses on lifespan. The premium version loses on diminishing returns. The middle is where the math works. Now let me address the part of this that's harder to talk about because it has nothing to do with math. Buying cheap is often a mindset that emerges from genuine financial stress, and you can't fix a mindset by yelling at someone for falling into it. When you're broke, the only number you can see is the number you have to pay today. The future lifespan of the item is irrelevant because you don't have the cash for the better version anyway. The cheap option isn't a choice, it's a survival adaptation. This is why the cheap trap hits hardest at the lower end of the income spectrum. The poverty premium isn't a moral failing of poor people. It's a structural feature of an economy that charges more in total to people who can only pay a little at a time. The way out of this is rarely a sudden upgrade to expensive purchases. The way out is building enough financial breathing room that you can occasionally buy the slightly better version, then more often, than most of the time. It starts with one category. Maybe shoes, maybe a coat, maybe a single appliance when the old one finally dies. Each better purchase compounds because the better purchase doesn't need to be replaced as often, which frees up the money that would have gone to replacements for the next better purchase. Over 5 to 10 years, the cheap trap cycle gradually unwinds, and you end up owning fewer things of higher quality that work better with substantially less total spending. But this requires something most people don't have. It requires a baseline of financial stability that lets you make purchasing decisions based on cost per use math instead of cash on hand this week math. If your account is empty when the shoes fall apart, you're going to buy the $38 pair again because that's all you can afford. The trap continues. Breaking the trap requires building a foundation underneath the buying decisions. The buying decisions can't carry the weight on their own. This is the part most personal finance content skips. They tell you to buy quality, then leave you alone with no path to actually getting there. Buying quality requires having the cash to choose quality. Having the cash requires understanding your real numbers, knowing where your money is leaking, and sequencing your priorities so that breathing room emerges over time. None of those steps are dramatic. They're not exciting. They're the unglamorous work of getting clear on your finances and then staying clear. But the breathing room they create is what eventually allows the cost per use framework to actually function in your life. You can't buy the $85 shoes if you don't have $85. You only get $85 by knowing where your money goes and stopping the leaks. If you watch this and you're recognizing yourself in the cheap trap, the next step isn't shopping at a different store. The next step is figuring out why you're caught in the cycle in the first place. I built a digital product called the Financial Reset System for exactly this gap. It walks you through getting clear on your real numbers, finding where your money is actually leaking, sequencing your priorities, and building a 30-day plan that creates the financial foundation you need to start making cost per use decisions instead of cash flow emergency decisions. Every number auto-calculates as you fill it in. The PDF guide walks you through each step. The 30-day plan gives you weekly checkpoints. The link is in the description and in my profile if you want to take a look. Once you have the foundation, the buying decisions take care of themselves. Without the foundation, you'll keep being forced into cheap choices whether you want them or not. Let me bring this back to where we started. The shoes in your hand at the checkout line. The $38 pair you're about to buy. There's nothing morally wrong with buying them. There's nothing morally superior about the $85 pair. The only thing that matters is whether you understand what you're actually paying for and whether the structure of your finances lets you make a real choice instead of a forced one. When you choose cheap because the math works for that specific item in that specific use case, that's intelligence. When you choose cheap because the price tag is the only variable you're looking at, that's the trap. When you choose cheap because cheap is all you can afford this week, that's a structural problem upstream of the purchase, and yelling at yourself for buying cheap won't fix it. The fix is the financial foundation that makes the better choice available. The hardest truth about all of this is that buying cheap is rarely a choice anyone makes consciously. It's a default that emerges when people don't have the breathing room to think long term. The economy is designed to extract value from that default. Every retailer that sells cheap stuff is, in some sense, profiting from the absence of financial flexibility in their customer base. The way to stop being a customer of that economy isn't to develop better taste or to lecture yourself about discipline. It's to build enough margin in your financial life that the cheap option stops being your only option. That margin doesn't come from earning more. People earning $200,000 a year fall into the cheap trap constantly because their lifestyle expanded to consume their income just as efficiently as someone earning $60,000. The margin comes from clarity, sequencing, and structure. The same things we talk about in every video on this channel. The same things that show up in every study of how ordinary people quietly become wealthy. Buying cheap feels like saving money. It almost never is. What you're actually doing is paying for the same item multiple times across years, accepting lower quality at every step, and watching opportunity costs compound against you while you congratulate yourself for being frugal. The cheap path is the most expensive habit in America, precisely because it disguises itself as the responsible one. The path that actually saves money looks more expensive on any single receipt and ends up costing dramatically less across decades. Once you can see that pattern, you can't unsee it. The math will show up in your life everywhere you look, in every category, in every purchase decision, in every closet full of unworn clothes, and every garage full of broken tools. The price tag is the smallest part of the cost. The lifespan is what you're actually buying. The cost per use is the only number that tells the truth. And the financial foundation underneath your buying decisions is what determines whether you can hear that truth or whether you're trapped in the loop that makes the truth feel irrelevant. You already know which loop you've been in. The next 30 days are your chance to start changing it.